That's very interesting. And Dr. Munang, I'm curious to get your take on that as well, because this balance between short-term versus long-term, because some financing mechanisms are structured in such a way as to emphasize short-term benefits and returns, and joint venture and different, other kinds of specific project financing come to mind. On the other hand, other financing mechanisms take a more long-term approach, such as issuing bonds with a faraway maturity date. And I'm curious your thoughts on whether you think there's room for both in climate change. Should one be prioritized over the others? Should climate finance emphasize the creation of long-term benefits rather than just addressing immediate needs?
Actually, both, because the reality is that people need to see that they can have a return on investment in the immediate moment, and then also in the long term. And I think if that is structured in the short, medium, and long term, we will have different investors scrambling in different spaces, either the short, the medium, and the long term. And I think that then brings in that dimension of Hassan bringing on this dimension of insurance and actually pension funds. And if you look at pension funds, I mean, that's the easiest entry point to tap to invest for the big investments that are actually needed and these huge sums of money that we mentioned here today. But I think what needs to be done is when you look at the different populations like today that are already suffering, there's drought in the Horn of Africa that have affected over 22 million people today as we speak. If the communities that are facing this drought were to access immediate finance, how would they get that? And even if governments were actually to provide stimulus, as we saw during COVID, which structures will they use to channel those? And that goes back to the point that I mentioned earlier, which is leveraging accessible structures to communities that do need this, but not only as a social finance, because one of the problems is that when you talk investment finance or climate finance in this case, it cannot just be seen through the social lens. And I think that has been part of the problem, especially in the developing world. It's not seen as investment finance, but it should become investment finance that even if the stimulus are given and de-risking tools are developed, we should use it in such a way that actually the communities leveraging this should use the money to invest in actions that can bring return on investment in enterprising activities. And that is one thing to do, which then brings me to the point of a change of a narrative. The narrative on climate finance has mostly been about social. It's been about, yes, helping to cope with the impacts of climate change. Now we need to move to investment finance, and that's why we only have 14% of the private sector as compared to 80% public-driven financing that mostly is going to be the talk in COP, which I believe that the narrative can change. And therefore, to answer you, we need short, medium, long term, but more so making sure that the needs of every community, which is different, because there are different investors. There are investors that are going to go at mega scale. There are also investors in local communities that may need accessible finance, not a lot of money, but then to build a simple solar dryer that a mother can use to dry her vegetable, or to get a solar power irrigation to irrigate her small piece of land in communities. And so I think that kind of thinking and logical approach that takes into consideration short, medium, and long term will be quite very, very helpful to engage the entire populace.